Abigail went into the mines for the first time when she was 14. She did not tell her parents. She told herself this was because they would worry, which was true. But the fuller truth was that she did not want to explain the reason. And the reason was not something she had words for yet. It was more of a feeling, an attraction. The way you recognize a song you've never heard before. Something in the body knowing it before the mind catches up. The mines were north of town, past Moreland's guild, behind a gate that nobody locked. She went in the early evening on a summer day when the light was long and golden, and the entrance to the mines was just a dark mouth in the mountainside that smelled like wet stone and iron. She went in. She was not afraid. That was the thing she couldn't explain, then or later. Most people felt something at the threshold, a hesitation, a coolness in the chest, the animal instinct towards the open sky. She felt none of it. She felt, if anything, a loosening, the same way you felt when you come, the same way you feel when you come home after a long time away and close the door behind you and let out a breath you didn't know you'd been holding. She stayed for 2 hours. She went down 12 levels. She found copper and a geode and a single piece of quartz that caught the torchlight and threw it back in pieces. And she put it in her pocket and carried it home like a found coin. She ate it that night, or she put it in her mouth without thinking, the way you put a pen cap in your mouth while you're reading. And when she came back to herself, it was gone. She ran her tongue over her teeth and tasted nothing but a faint mineral coolness, like water from a deep well. She didn't think about it again for years. By the time she was grown, the mines were simply part of her life. She went there 3 to 4 times a week, usually in the evenings, usually alone. She had tried going with Sam once and with Sebastian twice, and all those times the experience had been wrong in a way she couldn't articulate. Too loud, too much explaining. The mines were not a place for explaining. They were a place for the particular quality of quiet that existed only underground, only in the dark, only when the surface world and all its noise had been closed off above you like a lid. She went deep, deeper than Marlin recommended, deeper than her father knew, deeper than most people in Pelican Town had any reason to go. By the time she crossed to level 80, the monsters changed, slower, stranger, less like animals, and more like things that had developed in isolation over a very long time, the way species on islands develop into something that didn't quite match the mainland. She was not afraid of them either. She was aware that this was unusual. She was aware that being unafraid of things that ought to frighten you was not always a virtue, but the mines had a logic, and she had felt it from the first day, from the first step underground, and that logic included her. Whatever was down there, it had made room for her, or she had always had a room here, and the mines were simply where that room was located. She never talked about this, not to Sam, not to Sebastian, not to her mother, not to her father, whose worry she could feel like a weather pattern, not to the wizard, whose tower she had passed 100 times on the forest path without ever stopping, though she sometimes felt, passing it, the same pull she felt at the mine entrance, the same recognition, and kept walking. The thing happened on a Tuesday in autumn, deep into her 23rd year. She was on level 94. The light from her torch moved the shadows around in the way it always did at this depth, not quite naturally. The shadows seemed to lag slightly behind the light, as if they were reluctant to move. She had long since stopped noticing this. It was simply how shadows behaved down here. She was mining a vein of gold when she heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like a change in the quality of the silence. The mines were never truly silent. There was always the sound of distant water, the settling of stone, the faint skittering of things that preferred to stay out of torchlight. But this was a change beneath those sounds, a kind of pressure, as if something had been generating a very low and a very constant hum had suddenly stopped. She turned around. There was nothing there. The tunnel behind her was empty. The shadows were where shadows ought to be. The torchlight moved and the shadows moved with it, normally, the way they had not been moving a moment before. She stood there for a long time. Then she climbed back up. She did not know why. She hadn't finished what she'd come to do. She had more torch left. There was no reason to leave, but something in her, the same part that had always known the mines, that had recognized them at 14 without even being introduced, was telling her quietly and without urgency, but with great clarity. She didn't know why. She hadn't finished what she'd come to do. She had more torch left. There was no reason to leave, but something in her, the same part that had always known the mines, that had recognized them at 14 without being introduced, was telling her quietly and without emergency, but with great clarity, that tonight was the night to go up. So she went up. She noticed it 3 days later. She was looking in the bathroom mirror, doing something ordinary, brushing her hair, some morning task that required no attention, when she saw that her eyes were different, not dramatically, not in a way that anyone else would notice. The color was the same deep brown, the shape was the same, but there was something in the quality of those eyes, something in the way the light sat on them, that reminded her the shock of recognition of the quartz she had found on her first day in the mines. The way the quartz had caught the torchlight and thrown it back in pieces. Her eyes were doing that now, sitting in the bathroom light and throwing it back in pieces, catching it at angles that didn't quite correspond to the angles of the room. She leaned closer to the mirror. The eyes in the mirror did not lean closer. They stayed where they were, at the original distance, looking at her, the calm and mineral patience of something that had been underground for a very long time. Then they got up, a fraction of a second, no more, and it was just her face, just her ordinary face, looking back at her the way it always had. She gripped the edge of the sink. She thought about the hum that had stopped on level 94, the way the shadows had lacked, the urge to go up. She thought about the quartz. She straightened up. She finished brushing her hair. She went downstairs and had breakfast with her parents and answered her mother questions about her plans for the day in complete sentences. And she did not go to the mines that week or the week after, but she thought about going. She thought about it the way you think about a conversation you didn't finish. There was something down there that had stopped its hum when she arrived, and she understood, the part of herself that had always understood the mines, that it had not started again. It was waiting. She wasn't sure yet whether she was going to go back. She was fairly sure she will go back. But the mines knew she will eventually return. Willy had been fishing the waters of Pelican Downs Beach for 41 years. He had fished in rain and in fog and in the flat dead calm of midsummer and in the winter swirls that came in off the gem sea with a kind of indifference that he had always found easier to respect and to fear. He knew these waters. He knew their moods and their seasons and their particular vocabulary of color, the green black of a storm coming, the silver pink of a good morning, The deep and featureless grey of a day when nothing would bite and you fished anyway, because that was what you did. He knew what belonged here, so he knew the morning he first saw the shape that shape did not. It was early spring, a long time ago, long enough that the dog had been repaired twice since then, long enough that the shop he ran from the end of it had two different roofs, long enough that he'd considered once or twice simply deciding he'd imagined it. He had not been able to decide that. Some things are too specific to be imagination. He had been out before dawn, which was usual. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of cold that has no malice in it, just the simple fact of early spring not yet finished with winter. The water was dark and calm. He had set his line and was sitting with his coffee going cold beside him, watching the place where the line entered the water with a particular quality of attention that fishing requires. Not staring, not waiting, more like a readiness that has settled into the body and can be maintained without effort. This shape was about 40 feet out. It was below the surface. He could see it the way you see things underwater, as a displacement, a density, a difference in the quality of dark. It was large, not impossibly so, not the size of a ship or a whale, but larger than anything he had caught in 41 years of fishing, larger than anything he'd seen caught anywhere. It was not moving. He sat with his cold coffee and his fishing line, and he looked at the shape, but the shape did not move, and after a long time, it was simply gone. Not in the way things move away, in the things that were never really there stopped being there. He reeled in his line. He went inside. He made fresh coffee and drank it, looking out the shop window at the water. He did not tell anyone. He saw it 11 more times over the years, always in early spring, always before dawn, always in roughly the same location, 40, maybe 50 feet out in the water that was maybe 30 feet deep at that point, which meant the shape was resting on or just above the surface. He had, over the years, developed a theory, not about what the shape was. He had no framework for that and had decided not to construct one, but about its relationship to the water. It was his belief, based on 41 years of knowing these waters, that the shape had been there longer than he had, longer than the dock, longer than the town, that it was not a visitor. It was simply part of the system, present in the same way that the depth was present. He found this thought more settling than troubling. He was not sure what that said about him. What he had never been able to explain was the fish. It began the spring after he first saw the shape. He had been fishing the same waters his whole life, in the same way, with the same methods. But that spring, things started biting that had no business being in these waters. Not monsters, just fish that didn't belong. Fish from deep ocean, from cold northern seas, from rivers he had never fished, in countries he had never visited, not in great numbers, just one here and there among the usual catch, as if something at the bottom was sending them up, as if something wanted him to know how deep it had been. He never sold those fish. He threw them back, every one. It seemed right. It seemed like the appropriate response to a message he didn't understand, to acknowledge it without claiming to have read it. Some mornings, throwing a fish back into the dark water, he thought he felt something below the surface, a shift. The way water moves when something large moves far underneath it. He was always grateful on the mornings that he had not been the kind of man who needed things explained. He was 63 now, and his knees ached in the cold. and the dog needed a third new roof that he kept putting off. He went out every morning before dawn, regardless, the same way he always had. He set his line, he drank his coffee, he watched the place where the line entered the water. Some springs it was there, some springs it wasn't. This spring, standing on the dock in the early dark with his breath making small clouds in the air, he thought about the shape the way he thought about most things, without urgency, with only the particular weathered patience of a man who had spent a long time watching things he couldn't control. He thought, it was here before me, and it will be hereafter. He thought that it is not a bad arrangement. He reeled in his line. He had caught a pale, long bodied fish that he did not recognize. Cold northern waters, he thought, deep sea, a long way from home. He held it in both hands for a moment. It was calm, the way fish sometimes are, as if it had expected to be caught. He threw it back. The water received it without a ripple. He stood there a while longer, in the cold and the dark, watching the water with the same attention he had given it for 41 years, easy and patient, and without any particular need for it to be other than it was. Behind him, the town slept. Below him, the water was very dark and very deep and entirely itself.